Hello everyone, welcome back to a brand new episode of Side Projects. This one is all about China's replica cities. By the way, just a note before we get started, I've actually been to several of these replica cities. I went to China a few years ago just because I found them interesting and wanted to go see them, so that's what I did. About a decade ago, Western news services began to publish stories and photo sets about copycat cities in China. Pictures of replicas of famous landmarks like the Eiffel Tower or the White House began to circulate. These towns weren't amusement parks or tourist destinations, though. They were meant to be bustling suburbs outside of China's biggest cities. And by bustling suburbs, these were giant towns in themselves, because China is really big. Chinese citizens looking to get away from all of the hustle and bustle of the urban areas could move to the outskirts of town in a replica of Paris, Orange County, or Austria. Most of them were hailed as failed projects and ghost towns at the time, but that has begun to change. Yeah, even a few years ago when I was there, I expected them to be ghost towns, but there were lots of people living in these places. It was weird. Today, some of these towns have become popular suburban destinations, but they've had to make some changes to get there. This style of copying is known as duplitecture, where architects focus on recreating already existing structures instead of designing new ones. It was even the theme of a large development project called One City, Nine Towns. However, critics point out that our understanding of these cities has revealed the warped way that many modern cities are viewed today. It seems that China's replica cities are neither unique nor original. So let's get started. In 2001, the Shanghai Planning Commission, SPC, and then Mayor Cheng Liangyu sought to cope with Shanghai's rapidly expanding urban population. With the populace increasing from about 8.6 to 14.8 million over the previous decade, congestion in the city reached dramatic levels. So the officials decided to build new suburban areas in the nearby region, some as far as 100 kilometers away, closer to neighboring cities like Hangzhou. This plan was called One City, Nine Towns, and it relied on more than just new developments in less crowded areas to draw in potential homebuyers. Instead, the development focused on creating an environment unlike anything else found in China by attempting to recreate environments found in other parts of the world. This wasn't exactly a new idea, especially in China. American cities have long been influenced by European communities from which so many immigrants came. Similarly, American architecture heavily influenced modern Chinese buildings. The White House became popular inspiration for Chinese courthouses and hotels. However, One City, Nine Towns took this concept to a whole new level. Yeah, this was more than just inspiration. Selecting 9 areas, mostly European, as inspiration, the SPC hired architects who were familiar with the source material. For their German-inspired neighborhood, Anting Germantown, they brought in Albert Speer Jr., the son of the most notorious German architect in history, a famous Nazi. Speer Jr., initially based in Frankfurt, established a new office in Shanghai to focus on replicating the colorful Bauhaus style that marked some of Germany's most iconic cityscapes. But the replica wasn't limited to architecture. German businesses moved into the area, including Volkswagen, who built their largest Chinese manufacturing plant just down the road. Restaurants focused on creating an authentic Bavarian atmosphere, down to the bratwurst, pretzels, and beer. Statues of famous German inventors and composers stand throughout the city. They even held an annual Oktoberfest where Chinese citizens could get an authentic experience of what it's like to live in Germany. To further enhance the city's non-Chinese culture, standard practices like hang-drying laundry and enclosing balconies was banned, as was repainting houses. This was all part of a plan for recreating a genuinely foreign world for locals to live in. It is such a bizarre idea. Except it turned out that this wasn't a good plan for attracting Chinese people. The town, which had a capacity for 50,000 residents, has remained mostly empty throughout its existence. Yeah, I mean, it is a bit strange. Like, the closest reverse I can think of would be like moving into a Chinese-looking building in Chinatown. It's like, it's not naturally where I would choose to live. When phase 1 of the project was opened in 2007, no one purchased space in the city, and the project's second and final phase was cancelled. The area became little more than a destination for wedding photographs and social media personalities to use as a unique backdrop, because apparently some things are the same the world over. This became a common theme for many of Shanghai's replica districts. In the end, only 7 of the 9 towns were completed, but they were enough to draw the attention of people around the world, if not new residents, including me apparently, who went there. All of the completed portions include some of the most iconic, if not cliché, aspects of Europe's most beloved locales. In Holland Town, visitors can see windmills, cobblestone streets, and quaint canals. Copies of the Netherlands Maritime Museum, the Bijenkorf Department Store, and Hofwyk Mansion stand out on the street corners. Like Anting Town, Holland Town has become little more than a destination devoid of residents. Sweden Town and other Western-inspired districts have met similar fates. success. However, not all of the replica cities have become massive failures. In fact, within the last decade, the most famous of them all has cracked the code. I have been to Thamestown. It is absolutely surreal and bizarre. Perhaps China's most famous replica city is Sky City, or Tianzhucheng. This was part of the One City, Nine Towns plan, despite being closer to Hangzhou than Shanghai. Sky City is modeled after the French capital of Paris. Oh, I didn't realize it was called Sky City. I've been there as well. They have like a half-size Eiffel Tower. They have like a whole Champs-Elysees. It's wild. It's so bizarre. There's a model of the Eiffel Tower at 1/3 scale. Sorry, 1/3, reaching 108 meters tall. The town's center boulevard reflects the Champs-Elysees, with Hausen-style apartments running along its sides. Like the other replicas, it was full of experiences of French culture shoehorned into the city. Residents were encouraged to dine at the same time as Parisians, with restaurants not offering dinner until after 7 p.m. Diners were taught to savor caviar in the same way that a chic French woman might. Like Hansing, these practices may have turned off potential buyers. Indeed, when I went there, God, I can't remember where it was. It was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And it wasn't like this. It was just, regular Chinese restaurants and shops. It had really seemed to move away from let's actually replicate French culture to here are some buildings that look a bit French. Built in 2006, it was expected to house 10,000 people, but it remains mostly empty for the better part of the following decade. In 2016, new management took control of the town, and its fortunes soon changed. The company stripped Sky City of the trite cultural experiences, encouraging more traditional businesses to move in. So I definitely went there after 2016. The cafes and pastry shops remained, but instead of selling baguettes and croissants, they offered taro-infused cakes and other treats that combined Chinese tastes with a French feel. They also rolled back the earlier restrictions on cultural norms, allowing residents to hang their laundry and enclose balconies in glass. Yes, there was laundry hanging from all the buildings. I have in my kitchen at home, I have a picture of the Chinese Champs-Elysees, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's a nice picture of the Champs-Elysees." I was like, that is not the Champs-Elysees. Look at the laundry. The area still retains some of the quirks meant for it beyond its replica Eiffel Tower, that is. If the town includes a French language Montessori school so parents can enroll children in bilingual programs. Residents say they were drawn by uncommon luxuries like Western-style salons and spas. Altogether, the management company's strategy was simple. Instead of placing a French city in China, they created a Chinese city that sort of looks and feels just a bit like France. The results were spectacular. 1 year after new management took over, the town's population reached 40,000. Some say this is a bit of an exaggeration, but one thing is clear. People are moving to Sky City. In August of 2018, 663 new housing units went up for sale. Within 4 minutes, they were all sold out. Yeah, when I went to that town, it was busy. It was it was like 40-something degrees Celsius outside, and my clothes were soaked with sweat, and no one was walking the streets. Besides offering a unique environment, the city benefits from its location on the outskirts of town. The average price for an apartment is $14,001 per square meter, or about $200 per square foot, a third of the cost of nearby Hangzhou, and even less compared to Shanghai. With Sky City as the model, other locales began to adopt similar business models. It remains to be seen whether this will lead to newfound success for these developments, but it might not matter. Demographic indicators show that before long, the ballooning population surrounding Shanghai will just have no choice but to expand into the weird bits of Europe that are located outside their giant cities. This was mostly the case with Thamestown, a district modeled after a generic Tudor-style English neighborhood punctuated by red telephone boxes and an English-style church. Yeah, it's all there. And the most bizarre thing is it's all brand new. So it looks old, like if you're standing away from it, but instead of like a building, like having a bit of a slope to it because it's hundreds of years old, everything is like plastered over plaster and perfectly made and straight. It feels like a movie set more than anything else. Like every British city, it has a bronze statue of James Bond. No, we don't. Although unfortunately, it looks like Pierce Brosnan's Bond. What, you took Pierce Brosnan is the best. He's the Bond that I grew up with. Like most of the recent developments, the neighborhood was mostly empty for the better part of its first decade. Then Shanghai's expanding metropolitan area led to the construction of a new subway line, and a handful of stops were built within Thamestown. Soon afterwards, people began to move in. The district was aided by its lack of forced English culture. China's disdain for fish and chips meant that few British-style restaurants were ever built there. With Sky City and Thamestown as examples, it seems that there may still be hope that these former ghost towns can finally attract the residents that they need. Yeah, I stayed overnight in Thamestown. It was Chinese Chinese food. Like I was thinking, oh, maybe I can finally get some British food, because when I travel, I just like to take home with me. But no, there was nothing. There was nothing. Oh, there was also a giant bookshop that was just filled with fake books. The whole shelves were just filled with like books that were like famous, like the Count of Monte Cristo, except you'd open it would just be blank and there'd just be hundreds of them. And it's like, what is this? And it just turned out it was a cafe. So bizarre. While the one city, 9 towns model is the best known example of duplicatecture, that's a mouthful, it is far from the only one. Replica cities popped up throughout China around the turn of the millennium. In the northeastern Liaoning province, the port metropolis of Dalian has its own Venetian-style district. With a cost of 5 billion yuan, or about $750 million, no expense was spared in this development. The district has 4 kilometers of canals, and Chinese gondoliers dress up like their Italian counterparts. This is so strange. Visitors could take a quiet boat ride through the town, but only in the summertime as the canals freeze over during the cold winters. A small building reminiscent of the Doge's palace sits on a replica of Piazza San Marco. Hailed by some as the most audacious of all the duplicatecture towns, there's something of an uncanny valley effect. The Renaissance style falls short and looks more like a theme park rather than actual Venice, kind of like that hotel in Vegas. Plus, it's missing one of Venice's most notorious characteristics, the crowded streets. Like so many of the replica cities, Venice town has been hailed as a failure. It stands in contrast to the central Chinese city of Suzhou, which was built 1,500 years ago and has its own canal system and stone bridges. Unlike the Dalian version, Suzhou developed organically. The design wasn't meant to copy any other city, it simply fits its location. When Marco Polo visited China in the 13th century, he declared Suzhou to be the Venice of the East. It doesn't look like Dalian will threaten to take that title anytime soon. Perhaps the most blatant duplicatecture in all of China is found outside Huizhou in the southern Guangdong province. While the other examples took inspiration from European countries, that would be putting it kindly. They tended to be a bit of a Frankenstein's monster of a city, packing in all of the most cliched attractions. For example, Holland Town includes attractions found in Amsterdam, Voorburg, and The Hague. However, near Huizhou, there is an almost one-to-one replica of the famed Austrian village Hallstatt. Famous for its lovely townscape with a church spire piercing the sky, the Austrian version is set alongside a peaceful lake with an alpine backdrop. In China, the mountainous features are swapped out for palm trees and hills. Yes, the design is lovely, but to say that it doesn't fit in its location would be just a touch of an understatement. Now, there are countless other examples throughout China, including replicas of a Spanish town, Manhattan, and Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Few of these boroughs have seen the same success as Sky City and Thames Town. Some function mostly as tourist destinations for Chinese people looking to get a taste of Europe, but whether locals will ever move into these western districts, well, that remains to be seen. Following a series of articles and essays about China's replica cities, Westerners poured on their disdain for this copycat architecture, criticizing their blatant lack of originality. I just found it fascinating. I just wanted to go see it. Chinese President Xi Jinping addressed the issues in the following years, urging Chinese architects to avoid weird designs, encouraging building sustainability and structures with Chinese influence. However, this is easier said than done. Chinese architecture atrophied under Mao's rule in the 20th century. There's no question that dynastic Chinese buildings are unique and distinctly Chinese, but creative urban design was not prioritized in the early decades of the People's Republic of China. With little experience building original structures, architects have leaned on outside influence. To an extent, this is how all countries create their own style. People point out that Washington, D.C. is clearly influenced by the layout of Paris, though without carbon copies of its iconic structures. Perhaps after a decade or two of copying, the Chinese architecture industry will find its own voice for original and modern design. As for the fate of the completed districts, in all likelihood, they will eventually reach an outcome similar to Thames Town. China's population continues to expand rapidly today, especially in cities where rural residents move to for greater economic prospects. Chinese people may never be drawn to live in a fake Venice, but the low rents will surely be enough to eventually draw them in. It may be a decade or two before the towns are filled with people, but it seems almost inevitable at this point, especially in areas like Shanghai. We may not see new duplicatecture developments in the coming years, but don't be surprised if there's a bustling Dutch town in the middle of China by 2030. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all. It's gonna happen. It's just gonna happen. Anyway, this has been an episode of Side Projects. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, you know what to do. You must smash the dislike button. Nope, that's the wrong one. You must smash the like button if you liked it. The dislike button is if you didn't. Subscribe, and thank you for watching.